everybody, Mr. Bateman here from Musica Kirklees. I thought I'd do a video about writing lyrics for songs. Lots of people that I get to work with writing songs and things, often amazing composers of music, and find it quite easy to come up with melody ideas and chord ideas and things. But often words, even in professionals, is the thing that kind of stumps them a bit and presents a bit of an obstacle, and can make things a bit tricky. So I thought I'd do a video on 5 ways to come up with lyrics in lockdown, plus a few other little tips. So, way number 1 involves books. Now, something I might mention a couple of times here is that lots of people think that lyrics are these things that you have to be deeply emotional all the time to write, and they come from your soul and it's all magical. Now, occasionally that happens, but most of the time it's not like that at all, really. If you want to write lyrics all the time, if you want to write songs all the time, you've got to go out and find those ideas. If you're a painter, you don't just sit in your front room and wait for the magical images to come into your head. You go out and you find nice views to paint and find interesting things. So you've got to do the same with songs. Now, books are a really good example. For me, sometimes when I'm reading a book, there'll be a scene or a few pages where I think, wow, that's really cool. That would make a great song. And I'll go through and I'll underline some words that I think are really interesting, underline some phrases, and I'll write them back out again, and I'll find I'm starting to get ideas from the characters in these books, from the phrases and the situations that are unraveling. So next time you're reading a book, or if you're reading a book at the moment, think about a bit that might turn into a good song, that might translate. Are there some interesting words, some interesting characters? Keep books in mind. Method number 2 involves Netflix or a streaming service of your choice. This is actually something that a friend of mine suggested to me about 18 months ago when I was kind of struggling to find ideas. And ever since I've been doing it loads. What you do is you find a TV program that you find quite interesting. See if it's got audio description. If it does, brilliant. If not, don't worry about it. If it does, switch it on and watch it, but make notes whilst you're going. And what you might find is that there's a scene or something in this program that resonates with you in a weird, unexpected way. And all of a sudden, these characters, the phrases they're saying, things that are being said in the audio description become quite interesting to you. And you're making notes and you're getting inspired, and all of a sudden you've got a song unraveling. What also can happen is that some TV shows, and this is really clever how they do this, but everything kind of connects. And what you often find is that all these different characters and the different elements of the plot are all actually essentially expressing the same thing. And you'll find that there's loads of different metaphors and ideas coming out all about the same thing, and you basically end up writing a song about that TV program, which is quite fun as well. I was going to show you an example. This is something I've been doing quite a bit lately, and I recently watched the film Dunkirk with the audio description turned on, and I just wrote a song about all the scenes with Spitfires in. I mean, what a bizarre thing to do, right? But this is some of the workings that I was making as I was going through it. Method number 3 is kind of the opposite of both of those, and that is just to keep a journal. This is something that I've started doing recently, and I hadn't done it much in the past. But just every night or every morning, getting into the habit of writing down how you're feeling and what you're thinking. It's actually it's a really great thing to do anyway. It just makes you feel kind of better about stuff. But it's great to have a record of everything you're feeling and everything that you're thinking, and then sort of at the end of the month go back and look over all of those ideas and things that you've written. And actually, often you'll be really surprised about some of the things that you've written and how they pin together and different ideas emerging from these pages. The other thing that's really interesting is that if you do it before you go to bed or sort of early in the morning, when your brain isn't fully switched on, often some quite interesting things come out, and often some quite sort of poetic things come out, because your subconscious is sort of going for it and your brain hasn't quite clicked into gear. So keep a journal. Method number 4 involves stealing. Um, there's nothing wrong with stealing in music as long as you do it properly, and do it well as well. Now, something that I do quite a lot when I'm working with other people is that we'll kind of steal somebody else's structure. And I'll give you an example. Sometimes when I'm working with a whole room of year fours, for example, and what we'll do is we'll take Humpty Dumpty sat on a wall, and we'll just knock out words and replace them. So Humpty Dumpty sat on a wall. Humpty Dumpty will replace Humpty Dumpty with, I don't know, Jack Black. Sat, so let's find a different verb. Ran on a wall down a road. Jack Black ran down a road. Why was he running down the road, guys? Where was he running to? Who was he running from? And suddenly you've got a story emerging. So you just by stealing somebody else's structure and replacing those words and changing them as you go along, your own story starts to jump out and starts to take shape. Now, method number 5. I think this is number 5. Is all to do with an app called Word Palette, which I'd really like to show you, but I don't have, my iPad basically won't update and I can't download it. But if you have an iPad or an iPhone, go and get this thing called Word Palette. It's amazing. Now, quite a long time ago, David Bowie made sort of famous this aleatoric way of writing songs, and by that I mean sort of relying on chance. And what he was doing was taking newspapers and chopping out words and sort of putting them in sort of a bag or something, and then just kind of flying them out, and all these words would rearrange themselves, and you'd end up with a story that really he hadn't written, but it had just been sort of down to chance, which is a really interesting idea. Now, with Word Palette, what you can do is if you're reading a book online or an article that you find quite interesting, you can load in those articles and those different pieces of information that you're reading, even other people's song lyrics. And what it will do is it will kind of jumble them up. But it's clever. It kind of finds words that relate to one another, and sort of suggests things, but it kind of jumbles them up, and you can end up writing some really abstract, quite bizarre, interesting pieces of stuff with it. So if you can get on one of those things, explore it. But even if you can't, doing what David Bowie was doing with the newspapers and chopping things up, putting them in a bag and rearranging them and ending up with some sort of abstract lyrical art is still very interesting. There's 5 different ways to get started. In any of those ways, a really important thing is to just write absolutely loads of words. And I'll give you some examples. So these are some of my old pads, but I still work like this, really. And I start off by just writing absolutely loads of words. And what you'll realise is that a lot of them are absolutely rubbish and don't really make much sense. It doesn't matter at all. The more you write, the more you'll get a sense of exactly what your song is about and exactly what you're trying to say. And you'll get a sense on the pad of different sort of collections of words. So something will be pointing more towards that main message, which will become your chorus. With our chorus, you want to kind of give that main message in quite a simple way and a way that's going to make it clear to everybody what your song is about. But you'll also end up with collections of words that point more towards verses. And our verses are the things that tell the story and that kind of create that narrative. And you'll kind of end up with different sort of pictures and different things that join together. My pages will start to look a little bit more like this. You can see now I've kind of got different sections, different stanzas, verses, and maybe a chorus, maybe ideas for a bridge starting to form. Now obviously you may have music involved by this point, so you might kind of know what sections you need. You may not have touched music at all yet, in which case you've got total free rein to write as many different sections as you want, and then use what fits to the music or make the music fit around it. And you can see that as you do it, you end up with sort of different alternative options for different lines and different options for the ends of lines as well. Ends of lines are really interesting because they're often where we use rhyme the most. Now, rhyme is an interesting thing. I really like rhyme because often when we're being creative, limitations are really useful. Often when I'm writing songs, I'll write out a list of rules for myself to follow, like just using three chords. It's going to be this long. Just a list of kind of instructions, because having those limits helps to focus my attention a bit more, rather than kind of being daunted by just having a totally blank sheet of paper. And similarly with lyrics, if you've just got complete free reign of the English language all the time, it can be quite daunting. Whereas if you know that the thing is going to be structured by sort of particular sounds, so if I've got a line and I know the next line has got to be, has kind of got to lock in with the end of that line in a way, it kind of guides and it makes it sort of a less daunting thing. The thing you've got to be careful of with rhyme is that you don't just end up rhyming for the sake of it. You've got to keep in mind what your song is about and what your key message is about. Are your words always focusing on that? Is it always kind of focusing on that message and on that story? I use things like thesaurus.com. I even use RhymeZone. There's no shame in using RhymeZone. RhymeZone is brilliant. RhymeZone knows more words it can remember more words than you can. But even if there's an amazing word there, that you think, oh, that sounds great, and that rhymes with orange, which, there aren't many words that rhyme with orange. Keep in mind, is this helping me to express the song? Or is it just a cool word that I'm going to throw in because I'm frankly fed up of trying to find a word that rhymes with orange? So after a while, you'll end up with something that looks a bit more like this. We've got kind of... In fact, this is the Spitfire thing I was talking about earlier. Where we have some more kind of complete verses and sections that we start to feel kind of happy with. For me, I go through it with a different coloured pen. And then kind of make corrections or alterations and change them. But yeah, I mean, what you've got at this point are basically poems. Most people, when they're writing songs, don't even really start to think about words until they've got most of their music together. Some people will write the words in sort of a complete form before they even touch any music, and that's what I've been trying to do lately. So at this point, really, the words and how the words are going to work comes down to the music, and comes down to how much space you've got in the music. There's a lot of songwriters who kind of will have loads and loads of words, and they just make it work. And I think of bands like Crowded House, and a really good example of that. Randy Newman, who writes all the music for the Pixar films. He's a really good example of that as well, and having loads of words, but it kind of works. Whereas there's loads of other styles of songs, and I'm thinking of someone like Burt Bacharach, for example, who kind of has melody, and the words have to fit to that melody, and there's kind of no straying from that, because he feels like the melody is the most important thing, and shouldn't be changed for the words. So it's about how those two things fit together. But I hope this has been useful in talking about how we can come up with ideas for lyrics and how we can begin to develop them.